Welcome, everyone, for a special installment of the Real News Network podcast, produced in collaboration with In These Times magazine. The Real News and In These Times are both founding members of the Movement Media Alliance, a coalition of grassroots-aligned, social justice-driven journalism organizations committed to accurate, transparent, accountable, principled, and just media, and to working collaboratively to amplify our impact. Follow the link in the show notes to learn more about the Movement Media Alliance, and please subscribe and donate to the Real News and to In These Times, because we can't keep doing this work without you. My name is Maximillian Alvarez. I'm the editor-in-chief here at the Real News, and it's so great to have you all with us. Donald Trump is headed back to the White House in 2 months, and now that the GOP has won a majority in the House of Representatives, the fully MAGAfied Republican Party will effectively control all three branches of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So what room does that leave for organized labor to affect policy in the coming years? And is the very existence of organized labor in this country at risk? Today, we're going to discuss what a second Trump administration will mean for unions and for the labor movement writ large. Looking back at the first Trump administration and looking at the political appointments Trump is already making for his second administration, what should we be preparing for when it comes to workers' rights on the job, the right to organize, the makeup and functions of the National Labor Relations Board, and the general living standards and working conditions for working-class people around the country? And what about the Democrats? Outgoing President Joe Biden famously said he was going to be, quote, the most pro-union president in American history, and I make no apologies for it, end quote. So was that true? And even if it was true, has the uptick in pro-union rhetoric from Democrats in recent years actually corresponded to concrete policies that put working people, union and non-union, first? Is it time for a labor party in the United States? And will it be possible for that to be anything more than a pipe dream as we confront the realities of a Republican trifecta and an entrenched Democrat-Republican duopoly? In a statement released after Trump's electoral victory over Vice President Kamala Harris, Jimmy Williams, General President of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, stated plainly and powerfully, quote, "Working people deserve a party that understands what's at stake and that puts their issues front and center when campaigning and governing. A potential Republican trifecta, along with Project 2025, will be catastrophic for unions, including my own. But if the Democrats want to win, they need to get serious about being a party by and for the working class," end quote. So, for In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, I'm honored to be joined now by none other than Jimmy Williams himself. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, too. I appreciate it as well.
Well, we need your voice now, and we need to get folks' heads and hearts right for the fight ahead. And I'm really grateful to you for making time for this. So let's dig in here, because I know we only have a little bit of time with you. I want to start by talking concretely about what a second Trump administration will mean for labor and for you and your union specifically. So can you tell our audience a bit about your union, your members, and what you guys are preparing for with Trump coming back to the White House and a Republican trifecta controlling the federal government?
Yeah, we're primarily a construction union, but we also represent folks in the manufacturing sector. We also represent public employees around the country. And so we're a pretty diverse union, but primarily a private sector construction union. And in preparation for an incoming Trump administration a second time around, we're going to see attacks on every front. We're going to see it in the private sector through the NLRB. We're going to see it in the Department of Labor through weakened standards when it comes to things like apprenticeship programs, prevailing wage and Davis-Bacon. We're going to see it literally in everything we do. Oversight is not going to be there out there in the Department of Labor. So, we're preparing for an absolute all-out attack on every level. You can't take anything off the table with this group. Project 2025 laid out an absolute destructive path for labor unions, specifically public unions, but private unions as well. And so we're just, sitting here as wounded ducks, but, the attacks are coming and they're going to come fast.
Can you say a little more about Project 2025, right? Because there's been a lot of talk about this master plan, right? And Trump himself on the campaign trail tried to distance himself from Project 2025, at least rhetorically, because it was, deeply unpopular in the kind of public sphere. But there's a lot in Project 2025 that, appears like a sort of corporate CEO's wish list for remaking American society, like to be the exploitable kind of well of cheap labor with no rights that like every boss wants. So like, I guess for folks who are afraid of Project 2025 but don't know specifically what's actually in there, is there anything specific in the plans laid out in Project 2025 that like you want to stress for folks are going to have deep implications for workers and for unions?
Yeah, I mean, the labor movement itself represents so many different industries, but like it literally is going to be an attack on the federal employees, public employees first, stripping them of collective bargaining rights, limiting what you can and can't negotiate. There was even things in there about setting up corporate controlled unions to compete with the already existing unions. There's the all-out call for repeal of Davis-Bacon, an absolute attack on the apprenticeship programs, allowing corporations and business to construct their own apprenticeship programs, and all of the guardrails that the labor movement has provided for working people for generations are all on the chopping block. And my father always told me, show me who you hang with and it'll show me who you are. And Donald Trump has surrounded himself with believers in this agenda, with the folks that wrote it. And he's appointing people already in positions of power that believe in this approach to government. And when somebody shows you who you are, you got to believe them.
And, I think like one thing that is really important to stress for folks watching or listening to or reading this, right, that we're talking about sort of labor policy and labor law specifically and how that's going to impact the labor movement and working people. But of course, so many other kind of policy plans or stated intentions from the Trump administration, even if they are not focused on, say, the National Labor Relations Board, are still going to have deep impacts on the lives and conditions of working people around the country, including, Trump's most infamous campaign promise to wage the largest mass deportation operation in this country's history. Now, Jimmy, this, as is going to impact your industry a lot. I mean, we even saw examples of what happens when, an industry that does have a lot of undocumented workers in it, that does have a lot of contract labor, non-union labor mixed in with union labor, right? When you have these harsh anti-immigrant policies like Ron DeSantis does in Florida, you're going to end up with a lot of construction sites that are empty or filled with folks who don't know what they're doing. So I wanted to just like kind of get your perspective as an expert and a union leader in this industry. Like, how is the attack on immigrants and these plans for mass deportations, like, how do you expect that to impact the construction industry as such?
It's going to have dramatic impacts on our ability to organize. And both parties have gotten immigration wrong throughout the course of my time as an organizer. I've been, in my role as president of the union for the last 3 years, but prior to that, I was our organizing director. And I can tell you, under an Obama administration, under a Trump administration, under a Biden administration, and in the upcoming future, both parties have gotten it wrong. The workers that come here are being victimized, dehumanized. They have no path to organize. There are no rights in the workplace. And this idea that a mass deportation program is going to somehow solve the problem that this country has had for my entire lifetime and for two generations of preying upon immigrant workers is just the wrong approach. And, quite frankly, both parties have gotten it wrong. And I cannot see any pathway where this is somehow going to be helpful for the construction industry and for, union workers and union employers, because workers are just going to go further and further into the shadows. They're going to have less and less rights. We have members within our union that have been members of our union for over a decade that are going to now have their rights stripped away and are going to be working under the fear of deportation. I mean, this is just the wrong approach to how this country should handle the working class, and it has been wrong for quite some time.
I want to, in the few minutes we've got left, I want to kind of zero in on what you're saying about both parties getting this wrong, and also kind of circle back to your statement about what Democrats have gotten wrong in terms of serving a working class base and building a sort of class politics, a populist politics that could counter the corrupting impact of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. But just to kind of pick up on that last point of yours, I wanted to ask what role unions can and need to be playing in defending our fellow workers, especially undocumented folks, migrants, the most vulnerable in our midst and in our ranks. As unions have not always been great on this issue. I mean, there are really encouraging signs from your union, from unions like the laborers, Local 79 up in New York, where construction and demolition union workers have been reaching out to, non-union undocumented workers who were formerly incarcerated. And instead of seeing these low-wage, exploitable, workers as the enemy of union workers, right? They're trying to bring them into the fold. They're trying to organize them. They're defending their rights. So, how do we keep our union brothers and sisters and our fellow workers out there from falling into the trap of seeing this attack on our fellow workers, particularly immigrants, as somehow beneficial for American-born union workers here?
Yeah, it starts with we have to continue to organize in their workplace because, if you stop, the labor movement can never turn its back on the working class, regardless of what political landscape we live in. Secondly, in my opinion, we have to be able to tell the story in a much better fashion. I mean, Donald Trump has controlled the narrative that all immigrants that come to this country are here to, sadly commit crimes, take jobs away from you. I mean, all the fear and things that were said during the last, 10 years, quite frankly, since he stepped on the political world, we have to push that back with the real narrative of workers are here, they want to work, they need the rights to organize. And I think that's where the Democratic Party has missed it from the get-go. And trying to put together an approach that sounds like the Republicans, only lighter, it doesn't work for working people. And during this time, if the labor movement and if unions turn their back on the folks that are here working and want to work and don't provide defensive comfort, defensive relief, then we're going to miss it for generations.
The last time you and I spoke was 3 years ago, when organized labor and its advocates and many within the Democratic Party were trying to pass the PRO Act, the Protect the Right to Organize Act, right? I wanted to ask if we could just sort of use that as a springboard to kind of talk about what Democrats could have been doing and should be doing more to really appeal to and serve a working class base. What was the PRO Act, right? What would it have meant and how would it have changed people's lives if it had actually become law? And why did it fail? Why didn't Democrats kind of, push it harder, or was it not fully up to them?
Yeah, it wasn't fully up to the Democratic, slim majority in the Senate. You needed 60 votes in order to pass the PRO Act fully, and there's zero Republican support for the PRO Act. So you can't fully blame the Democratic Party for not being able to, enact that law during Joe Biden's time. But what you can blame the Democratic Party is for missing the tone and realizing that the Democratic Party has to be about movement building. And the story about how broken our labor laws are hasn't been told by the Democratic Party. We get little crumbs on the edges here and there. And truthfully, what's needed in this country is to organize a movement about giving workers more rights on the job. The PRO Act does that. It fixes 80 years of lost labor laws in this country. It fixes all the wrongs that have been done over the course of my lifetime and others. And that story needs to be told to the American public as a whole. People don't realize that the basic rights they have right now in their workplace, and let alone how difficult it is to organize your workplace in the wake of how screwed up our system is. Look, I can tell you just in the construction industry, currently the model that's used in the non-union sector is to misclassify everybody as an independent subcontractor. Well, those workers don't even have rights to organize a union in their workplace because they're being abused and victimized as self-employed independent contractors. The PRO Act fixed that. The PRO Act made elections and corporate interference illegal, to where currently if you wanted to organize your workplace, you have to go up against your boss in a way that is totally weighted towards, management. And it equaled the playing field to get to elections quicker, to get to bargaining quicker. And those are the things that workers need in this country. And the Democratic Party has failed to tell that story to the 80% of the world that doesn't come from a union household.
So I know I've only got you for like another minute or two. So by way of rounding out, I kind of want to zero in on, the last sentence of the statement that you put out after Trump won the general election. You said, as I read in the beginning, if the Democrats want to win, they need to get serious about being a party by and for the working class. Now, again, the last election just sent a very big sign to all of us that they don't want to do that. So I wanted to ask you, what would that look like? What should that look like? How do we get there concretely? And for folks out there who, are maybe just done with the Democratic Party, what role can they still play in advancing this movement through their unions and through other forms of engagement outside of the Democratic Party?
I mean, I think the question is right in front of them right now as far as the party goes. And are you willing to allow the labor movement to set your economic agenda for the working class? Or are you going to continue to try to woo over corporate interests and blend them with a message that somehow is supposed to help build out the working class? Because this last election was an absolute refusal to think that the Democratic Party actually works on behalf of the working class. And going forward, if the labor movement isn't allowed to set the agenda for what the Democratic Party's message is for working class people, they're going to continue to fail. They're going to continue to lose. And they need to really take it serious as they figure out how to rebuild a message that is going to be attractive to working class people. And quite frankly, at this point, I don't have much faith that the corporate interests that are still involved in the Democratic Party are going to cede that power either. And that's the fight ahead within the Democratic Party. And the labor movement needs to call balls and strikes, needs to be independent of either party, and needs to know when and how to engage in our electoral politics the right way.
So that is General President of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, Jimmy Williams. We've been speaking with Jimmy for this special collaborative report by In These Times magazine and the Real News Network. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. And thank you again, brother, for all you're doing for the movement.
Thank you, my man. Take care.
So that is Jimmy Williams, General President of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. I want to thank Jimmy for joining us today for this important conversation. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening, and I want to thank you for caring. And one more time before you go, If you want to see more reporting like this from the front lines of struggle around the U.S. and across the world, then we need you to become a supporter of the Real News Network and In These Times magazine now. Follow the links in the show notes and donate today. I promise you, it really makes a difference. For the Real News Network, this is Maximillian Alvarez signing off. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Solidarity forever. Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please, tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.